I'd like to welcome Andreas Sennheiser to Magic Leap's first LeapCon. Andreas, so it's been a few years since we first met. You've been a friend of our company, watching us grow from the very beginning.
Yeah, it was an exciting experience also for me to see how your company had envisioned something so great that for me it was unimaginable, especially when I saw your first gear, which was room filling, and to imagine this now 4 or 5 years later to be a true wearable and to see it is really amazing.
I think when you first came by, it was the benchtop system. We also called it the Beast. And I think it was a real dream at that point to think about miniaturizing that device into something that you could wear and use today, something that we just shipped a few months ago. So it's actually very exciting to have people that have been with us on that journey here at our very first conference for creators.
Yeah, I think what for me was most amazing, what connected us was a little bit the vision to create something in our minds which is physically inexistent, and which we also try to do from the audio side when reproducing sound as perfect as possible. So that's why I'd like to take the opportunity to ask some questions about how audio can make an extra difference to augmented reality.
Absolutely.
So Ronnie, we've been embarking on this journey now for 4 to 5 years already, and obviously both our companies have an interest in it. Tell me a little bit why you think it is a good strategic fit.
Well, first of all, something you may not totally realize, the very, very first instance of Magic Leap, it was called Magic Leap Studios, was in my garage, my little garage at home, which I had turned into a recording studio. So it really started out audio. I love music, I love audio, love recording, love what you guys have been building over the years. Some of the best microphones and speakers, the best artists in the world, the Beatles, all kinds of people have used what you make. And it was always part of my DNA and like what I believed in. So audio was never a question. And in fact, one of my real first thoughts around Magic Leap were, in sound you can conjure so much great visual imagery. And how could you approach the majesty of great sound with visuals? Because I thought, like with television and even with film, something was still lacking. You didn't have that full expansiveness that you could do with an orchestra, that musicians could take you to those special places. And I was hoping maybe we could visually match what's possible in the sonic world. So it always, for me, came from sound.
Okay, that's interesting, because that's really mirroring very much what we also try to achieve with the sound especially when we talk about spatial or 3D sound, because what we felt was lacking in most reproductions was the emotional impact of it. So it may sound great or genuine, but it didn't really feel that way. And when I saw first what you have achieved on the visual side, it looked like all of what we tried to achieve for many years in researching in 3D audio algorithms or making binaural renderings and all kinds of spatial sound, suddenly found a counterpart on the visual side which would make the experience better. Even though if you just listen to something, we could probably imagine what we see while not seeing it. But with your gear now, it looked like the perfect match. So for me, it was an obvious no-brainer to reach out and seek for collaboration there.
Well, and I think what's interesting with things like sound fields, with what we're building, you can understand someone's position in space. You can know their binaural head transform. You can imagine recreating the sound field if it's in a physical location with a great number of your physical speakers, or using math and physics to calculate with smaller onboard systems what is that true sound field. And I think that's the most naturalistic thing that we human beings want. It's like when you go to a real orchestra, I think when we met early on, you played me a sound field of an orchestra, which was incredible. Like it really felt like it took you, I think it was the Vienna Orchestra or something. It was absolutely amazing. And I think it would combine that with spatial visual imagery, that would be the next level for moving people. In what way would you say that spatial audio impacts and matters for truly immersive spatial computing experiences?
For the whole experience, I always tended to look at the visual to give us the information of the context to see, so what what's there and what's not there, and the audio part as giving us the cues of where to look at. I mean, if something happens behind us, and I think it probably was an evolutionary benefit if you would hear the dinosaurs creeping up from behind or something like that. So probably everyone who could not hear 3D audio is extinct now. So that's why the emotional impact of having good sound probably is the biggest addition that we can bring to the information of the light field.
Well, I was always very fascinated by great music, great sound, and great either live or great reproduction of that sound could evoke deep visuals that you could see in your own brain, and also deep emotional response. And it was interesting how the sound could trigger visuals, but the visuals that you could imagine in your own head were never quite the same thing when you saw like music plus video. It was interesting, but it was flat. Whereas in your mind, you can go on a whole journey that's a sonic visual journey when you're listening to a great composer, Hendrix, Beethoven, Mozart, something like that. So the idea that could we express some of what you're actually seeing on the inside and bring that in the world combined with truly spatial sound, that would be an incredible thing for some great artists to share the combination of what's in their head. Not just the sounds, but the visuals they might be imagining. How do you share that? Which means that you need a really good way to capture the spatial components of audio.
But if I take that to an extreme, would that mean that you could probably relive everything that you could recreate or that happened and store it as a memory? If you have the perfect visual and the perfect audio, it's probably becoming part of your biography of a true memory.
I completely believe that's going to be possible. We have a concept we're going to be talking actually about tomorrow. We call that a live stream. You could imagine that you're with your great-great-grandkids one day. And instead of showing the photographs or video of Thanksgiving or a holiday event, they see that memory come to life, the visual and the sound, maybe even the smells one day of what happened. And the way people looked at photographs as foreign in the beginning or videos as foreign, actually bringing a real memory to life could be a very interesting thing. It's ground we need to tread upon carefully because
it's an ethical question also.
Yeah, but it's very possible the combination of sound fields and light fields will recreate part of our memories in the world in front of us, and that could be incredible.
Then I already know what I would recreate, because there's one thing I really regret is never having seen Freddie Mercury on stage personally. So that was one of the things I kept postponing until it was too late. So probably that's one of the things that are going to implant as a memory.
So Andres, what should creators know about spatial audio, and how should they think about creating truly immersive, mind-blowing experiences?
First, they need to be very curious about trying out, because what we have envisioned already is certain ideas of how to use sound. And for me, sound has three really main purposes. One is in the augmented reality. One is to give cues where to look at. So that's the one thing. Second is to create an atmosphere, which is really is it creepy? Is it relaxed? Is it? And the third thing is really providing the content, getting the content across in the most natural possible way. And if creators pay attention to all those different levels, then I think they should just let their creativity run wild and see what's happening, because it would be completely wrong for us to assume that we have any idea of what's possible. But I think it's just a tool set that we can provide that at the end all the creators need to explore to find out how they best create the feeling, the images, or the audio images that they want to create.
Yeah, and I think with something like spatial computing, sound field is maybe one of the most important tools a creator has, because it could evoke a sense of fear, excitement, mystery. You can have a dinosaur roaring in a deep bellowing way from behind the door going down the hallway, and as it comes closer or it sneaks up behind you, the hair on your neck could stand up.
Yeah.
I think it's going to play such an important role, like soundtracks in movies, but maybe even more, because it feels like it's in the space, and what you don't see might be more exciting or more frightening than what you do see.
Yes.
It's almost like don't overdo the visual. Play with the suspense, play with the imagination, and sound will really play an incredibly strong role, sound fields especially. And then when you have the visual, it will reinforce this massive suspense. So I think learning how to hold back a little bit on visual and play strongly on the audio will be like, that'll be the next Hitchcock.
Yeah. Exactly. I was about to refer to the Hitchcock movies, where I think that if you just look at the pictures, there's nothing really only little scary or gross. It's not like a horror movie, but if you turn off the visual and just listen to it, it's probably as scary as it is with the visual, or even more. And I remember as a child being sometimes with my grandparents. They had a very old house, a large mansion. Just a little crack of the wood could spark a lot of emotions and fear there, and I'm sure creators can reproduce.
You're actually triggering a great exercise for creators, because you can imagine, you use what we've done with Magic Leap 1 and imagine creating an experience only with the sound, only with sound field, and see how far that can take you and what kind of emotions you could evoke, and then think about layering the visuals. It's an entirely different way to create, but it could result in some of the best things people ever do.
So when creating such experiences, what would creators need to know about consumer expectations before they get started?
Well, I think there's a lot to learn from theater, from film, from live music, live concerts that will be brought into spatial computing. First of all, the taste never goes away. Great art direction, great editing, and great composition never goes away. I do think even the term end user, I think users will be co-creators. I think even though they might be experiencing something built by someone else, by being in it, by being a participant, they're less passive than someone sitting in a seat in a movie theater. It's going to end up being a more active, emotional, immersive experience. And I think that's going to be quite interesting. And maybe one of the key take-homes, don't think completely like you're just passively sending something. Anyone you're creating an experience for, both for the audio and visual components, has freedom of movement. They can move their being around, they can move where they're looking. So they're going to have much more of an active role. So like classic Shakespearean theater in the round is one way to think of it. The sound of the person has to draw the eye. Like in film and TV, the editor can make a cut and show something. Here you might need to draw the volume and draw something to get the attention. And it's often going to be the volume of the actor or the way they're acting or where that sound's coming from that'll pull. It'll be like pull the camera, it'll pull the attention of that user in the audience.
So that's a cue then?
That'll be a key cue.
Okay.
And you're going to have to think using not just one medium like TV or film, because it has a number of things that won't transpose, but look at classic theater, look at orchestras, like when the violin section's going, you know where they're coming from, so your head moves to that place in space because you know that's where they are. And I think spatial audio will actually draw the eye through sound of the person you're creating for.
If we take that thought one step further and you say we're in it and we're not just looking at it, and we can move around and take any possible perspective, do you also think we can interact in a way that actually the plot evolves depending on how we're behaving in the situation? Like we're being a character of a movie, rather, which has an influence on how it's evolving, rather than somebody that's just a bystander looking around?
Absolutely. One of the tenets of spatial computing is interactivity, and another tenet is like sentience, that what you create will be aware of you and you will be aware of that creation, and those things will interact. And that's what the world feels like. When you're out in nature, the trees are blowing in the wind and animals are aware of your presence. Nothing is unaware that you exist there. Everything is one big interactive experiential thing, and I think our kind of computing and spatial computing is very much like that. And that means sound has an incredibly strong role to play, because as you move through an experience, it'll indicate that interactivity and sentience. As you do something, as your emotional state changes, you'll see this change in response. Something might get loud and angry, it might get quiet. We did an experiment with this group, Sigaros, called Tonandi, and just the hearing the crackle of electricity in a sound field with your finger could make you feel like you have that jolt of electricity moving through your finger. And when you see it and hear it at the same time, it almost brought other senses into being, creating a kind of synesthesia. And that kind of interactivity and responsiveness is just the very beginning of what's going to be possible here.
Actually, that was something which I experienced when I first had a chance to try out your product, where the little fish that was in the air, for me, I felt it on the skin. And that was as exciting as it was scary, because I knew there was no fish, but it felt like there was one. So that I had that very experience that you just described.
So Andres, how is Sennheiser establishing and continue to grow its leadership in augmented audio, spatial audio, now and in the future?
It's actually kind of funny, because we are a family business and completely independent from any outside influence other than what the customer wants from us. We've been researching in spatial audio and 3D audio for more than 15 years now, without really knowing what kind of application it would ever go into. So part of how we got into this was just because we found it was cool. We just liked the effects of having this spatial audio. And only a few years back, when we saw what happened in the area of VR, AR, we got a gist of what's possible if we perfect that and actually have products, both hardware and software, on the market. So our VR mic was the first product of the AMBEO line, and our AMBEO line is the 3D audio or immersive audio product line. Now we have software that complements it, and now there's, we have a new product, the AR1, which is fitting your offering perfectly. So this is how we somewhat got into it a little bit by accident, just because we did the research and then we were ready when the trend was there, but also try to envision a little bit what's behind the mainstream and what's maybe small plans, like your company 5 years ago.
So Andres, how do you see the production of spatial audio impacting music producers, and also the way it will be consumed now and in the future?
Yeah, if we envision that it's being consumed as a combination of a visual, visual creation and an audio creation, then I think we need to really start already from the recording side to think about how it's being consumed. And I assume now I can relive a concert with your gear as if I was present at the time it was happening. And if I have that in mind, of course, the ways we are recording sound in a volumetric capturing format needs to be dramatically different from how we do some spot miking today. Of course, we're making a lot of experiments right now in finding the right format for volumetric capturing, but then also the entire mixing process will be significantly different. Probably we'll be mixing in AR or in VR for AR, and no longer standing in the studio with 64 individual faders in front of each other, but probably rather interacting with virtual mixing objects, like we can be interacting with virtual objects using your gear.
I think one component that all music producers should be aware of is that if you record it and capture it in spatial audio, you could send it down to multi-track, you could send it down to 5.1 in stereo and mono, whereas it's harder to go the other way. So it seems like spatial audio is that's the most natural state of sound and music to be in. So if you're in film or live music production or doing something in the studio, moving to spatial audio now preserves everything you've done for the future and doesn't take away any of the ability to go downward.
Yeah.
So it seems like it'd be an excellent thing for music producers to realize, if I want to future-proof my recording sessions, which could be a DIY in your garage or millions of dollars if you're a major artist or doing a major movie, it'd be wonderful if they started using the kind of gear you're building to future-proof all the recordings today. I think that may be one of the most important things.
I couldn't agree more. Tell me, Roni, why is spatial computing really the future?
It's an interesting question because it's the future, but it's also our past. Our brain is a spatial computer. It takes in light field and sound field and touch and smell and taste and creates a spatial world that we experience in our visual cortex and other systems of the brain. We are in a spatial world. Everything about us as human beings is spatial and physical. And everything we've done from painting and film and television has flattened that world. Mm-hmm. So making computing feel like the real world is really about making our art and our technologies fit how human beings are. We evolved into how we are in a physical world that is spatial. Mm-hmm. It seems like the most natural step and the one where maybe for the next few hundred years human beings will create and invent in, because it's such a natural fit with our physiology. Our brain, everything about us seems to scream out for spatial computing to be what we are, because we're a biologic spatial computer to begin with.
So then that means I have a spatial computer here,
yes,
and I have a spatial computer here, which could be my natural extension to what I have already, because I have we only have our 6 senses, and probably with the gear that uses spatial computing, I could extend my senses to the nth level. Is that thinkable?
It is, and maybe a way to think of it is like an acoustic guitar has a certain amount of presence and sound, and it's wonderful. But when someone figured out how to plug that into an amplifier, and they plugged it into pedals, they extended the range of what was possible. So I think of what we're doing in spatial computing and what you're doing in spatial audio together as amplifying the creative potential of artists. It's like moving from the acoustic guitar to the electric guitar, except the instrument is your brain and the world around you, and it's going to be a wonderful era.
So it sounds like we're really at the beginning of something great, and I'm happy to continue to explore that with all the creators of this world.
That's our hope, Andreas, and we really appreciate your journey with us from an idea in a very small garage-like setting to where we are today, which is the very beginning, and we're inspired by companies like yours, which took also early ideas and visions of microphones and headphones and speakers, and now it's part of culture and part of almost all music and film. There's something your company has made that touches it. So it's very inspiring for us at the very beginning of our journey to have someone like you and your family's company to be part of it.
Thank you.
Your sound rules.